Me ignoró Sog. Vino, tiró 50.000 bits y se fue.
It was such a shock when at a party a friend told me that the Bleach video I had uploaded earlier that day had been watched by 20,000 people. I was happy. The video was a big step forward for me in terms of writing, editing, telling a story, and it went on to be the third most viewed video on my entire channel with over 3 million views. But there was a problem. The information that story was based on was wrong. Initially, the reaction was really positive. Even Bleach fans seemed to appreciate the video. But over time,
muchas gracias, afición. Este para vosotros.
Diexo just resubed for 3 months. El Prime acá.
El Prime acá. 64.5% de la barra. A 11 subs de los 1100. A 11. Y vamos a llegar al 15. Sol hizo que llegáramos al 15. Chúpenle todos la pija a Sol. Van a tener que chupar esa pija como si no hubiera un mañana. Pero chupando así. Glac, 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 glac. Se atragantan. ¿Qué voy a comer en esta Semana Santa? A la mañana, y digo al mediodía, pasta. Y a la noche, croquetas de papa.
People started to point out glaring mistakes in the fall of Bleach, and while I waved it off as people being angry on the internet at first, eventually I was left with the uncomfortable reality that I had fucked up. And I've talked about this on Twitter, in other videos, and in the description of that video, but there would always be people telling me that I needed to remake the fall of Bleach. And the thing that pisses me off most about these people is that I agree with them. The Fall of Bleach was built on a simple idea, that the magazine Weekly Shonen Jump ranks its series by order of popularity in its table of contents based on reader surveys. And when I charted Bleach's table
Eduardo __ Ignacio me hizo explotar CON 10 hermosas SVS.
¿Qué acaba de pasar? ¡Somos 1099 subs! ¡Uno más! Muchas gracias, Ignacio. ¡Uno más! ¡Uno más! ¡No! Es eso en punto de suscriptores. Estamos a suscriptores 1099. ¡Uno más!
Muchas gracias, afición. Este para vosotros. ¡Sí!
Rick MM paga la universidad de mis hijas.
1100, hijos de puta. 1100, hijos de puta. Hijos de puta. Vamos. Le voy a poner en el título día 8. Te amamos, Sog. ¿Te parece? ¿Te parece, Sog? ¿Te parece? Seems legend to me. Hijo de puta el Sog. Está re tranqui. Qué hijo de puta.
Content's position over 10 years, I noticed a trend as Bleach went from the third most popular position to gradually fall.
¡Pah! Se lo cogieron.
Falling all the way to the back of the magazine before being cancelled in 2016. My video charting how the decline in quality of Bleach's story correlated that trend. There's two huge problems here. The first being the idea that the Shonen Jump table of contents reflects the reader's surveys is a heavily circulated piece of misinformation with no definitive evidence to substantiate it. Sure, it's possible that a negative response to Bleach in the reader's surveys could have pushed it to the back of the magazine, but it's equally possible that Jump wanted to take Bleach, one of its most popular series, and put it to the back to incentivize readers to read all the way through the magazine, bringing eyes to lesser-known series. The point is, we don't know. It's a decision made by the editor-in-chief, but the logic behind it is not available to the public. The second is the idea that Bleach was cancelled. This became another heavily circulated piece of misinformation when Bleach was announced to be ending in just 5 chapters, which caused a lot of speculation given how abrupt it seemed and created an interesting narrative when combined with the misinformation about the rankings. But again...
A ver, es cierto que Bleach termina de una forma muy abrupta y nadie entiende qué pasó. Chris, ¿qué pasó? Zog pasó. Mirá los máximos donadores de la semana. Mirá los máximos donadores de la puta semana. Pasen el clip de Zog. Pasen el clip de Zog. Ahí está. Acá tienen. Disfrutemos el poder de Zog.
Didi Heart.
Me levanté, me estaba tomando mi café matinal, mi cafecito tranqui. Viene Zog y me dice, ¿cuánto por verte un video de Bleach de 45 minutos? Digo, 30.000 y el chat me dice, no, pedí 50.000 y yo digo, 50.000, no los va a tirar. 2 minutos después, toma. Y se quedó re tranqui. Ah, y ya somos 1100 subs. Basado, Zog. Basado. ¿Pasamos a Ilu? No, todavía nos faltan como 50 subs para pasar a Ilu.
And there was never any confirmation of this. It likely had much more to do with Tite Kubo's exhaustion after writing a manga for 15 years, as well as a declining health. And even Kubo himself later stated in an interview how he ended the series how he wanted to. So, first thing we need to address, did Bleach actually fall in popularity? Well, our best indication of that is in its sales figures. If we look back at Bleach's yearly sales, we can see it topped 6 million units in 2009, before a pretty steep decline, bottoming out at around 2 million units in 2016. But yearly sales estimates can be misleading, so what do the volume sales say? We can see here that Bleach's volume sales peak at volume 37, selling 800,000 copies, before a similar decline kicks in, leaving its final volume sales at just over half that at 440,000 copies. There's still a little room for error here, so I want to look at how Bleach was performing compared to other massively popular series of this time. And we can see that in this data table, where you can see why they were called the Big Three. One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach selling dramatically more than any other manga, not just in Jump, but in the world. Before Bleach begins a pretty dramatic fall, disappearing from the top 10 in 2012, eventually landing at position 22 in 2016.
Pensá que Bleach todavía estaba en emisión cuando perdió el puesto. Estando en emisión, perdió... Mirá Fairy Tail ahí. Mirá la Fairy Tail. Mirá la Fairy Tail ahí. Mirá la Fairy Tail ahí. De tranqui.
It is impossible to take all these figures into account and credibly argue that Bleach didn't have a significant decline in popularity. But if that's the case, then what's the problem with that original video? And the problem is that this is a gross misrepresentation of that decline. And because I believed it, that combined with my own personal disappointment in Bleach led to me making claims that were insubstantial at best and straight up misinformation at worst. But the much bigger problem is that I didn't correct those mistakes soon enough. When I checked the video's stats earlier this year, it was still getting thousands of views a week, meaning it was still spreading that misinformation. And in hindsight, I should have done this a long time ago, and for that, there is no excuse.
Hay algo muy gracioso con Tite Kubo, que cuanto más mejoraba su dibujo, más decrecía su calidad de historia. Dibujaba mejor, escribía peor.
So, to my audience, to the people who love Bleach, and hell, to Tite Kubo.
Chicos, nadie ponga ZZZ, porque este es un video que nos pasó Sog por alargar el directo un día más. Deberían estar diciendo gracias, Sog, en lugar de poner ZZZ. No hay que faltar el respeto a Sog. Dua y Bandem, si siguen, los baneás. Porque esos peruanos que no pusieron ni un peso se están aburriendo con un video que pasó el hombre que salvó el stream.
Each one of you deserve better than you got from me here, and I'm sorry. That is the most important thing I'm going to say this video. Now what I want to do is re-evaluate Bleach in its entirety. And I gotta say, it was a strange, nostalgic feeling rereading the first couple of chapters, and I had to wonder what I would now make of this legendary series, eyes unclouded by hate.
Yo les tengo que decir la verdad. Bleach tiene muchas cosas poronga. Tiene muchos momentos en los que falla y tiene muchos errores. Pero ¿viste cuando la tenés acá y no la podés olvidar? ¿Viste cuando escuchás sus openings y decís, qué linda que sos? ¿Viste?
And I was shocked to discover
it's still Bud! Woo! You lose again, Bleach fans! You lose again!
Okay, no, I'm just fucking around. Kinda. We'll get there. But before we do, I want to shout out DBZ Imran's video on Bleach, in which he addresses some of the flaws in my original video. This video being a way more positive take on Bleach than you're going to get here, and while I don't agree with a lot of the conclusions he comes to about the quality of Bleach's story, he's a cool guy, and you should totally follow him if you're into Bleach. And I hope by mentioning this, it's going to be taken as a sign of good faith.
Tengo que hacer un top de mejores dibujantes del manga shonen. Tengo que hacer un top. Y claramente Tite Kubo tiene que estar ahí.
That I don't consider my own viewpoint on Bleach as one of some omnipotent super being whose every whim reflects an indisputable truth. Rather, I am just an awkward little square person with an opinion as valid and flawed as the next humans, but one who just so happens to have repeatedly tumbled ass backwards up YouTube mountain by complete accident, with a follower count which, oh Jesus, fills me with an existential anxiety I can only express through this gif from Indiana Jones where a magical cup melts a man's face off. And with that in mind, let's begin. One of the criticisms I regret most in that original video is the idea that Bleach's art gets worse. Bleach's style does change over the course of its run, starting as a looser, more playful style before evolving into something more rendered and moody. But that later style does fit the more serious tone of later Bleach, and if Kubo doesn't want to illustrate a lot of backgrounds, who gives a shit? Whether it's chapter 6 or 600, the idea that Kubo's artwork gives you anything to complain about is insane.
Fua, mira cómo dibuja el hijo de puta, oh.
He's able to render battles with an explosive level of impact and spectacle, while also able to imbue his characters with a really subtle sense of emotion. Kubo's a master at expressing visually who these people are, and particularly through their clothing. Take the 13 Soul Society captains, all of whom wear the same basic uniform, but each have altered it in some way with these little touches that are so subtle but so expressive. There's one page where he just uses tiny close-ups of different captains' outfits to identify them, and immediately you know who they are just from how expressive these little details are. And this goes double for Ichigo and his friends. Part of the appeal of Bleach is that these characters are not just kids like in other shonen series, but are teenagers. And Kubo communicates this beautifully through the clothing they wear. You can feel the fashion of the early 2000s in each character design and splash page, and it was stylish and cool, but critically, it visually communicated the idea of adolescence. And that was the appeal of Ichigo. He wasn't a boundless spring of shonen optimism, he had a bad attitude and a short temper, especially in this one page where he expresses his disdain for the systematic authority of his school and teachers, his willingness to fight corrupt systems becoming a much bigger deal later in the story. But he was also just a lot of fun to watch, especially when these zanier characters bounced off him, like Orihime. I forgot how hilarious she is in the earlier chapters, but this drawing of herself in the future is maybe one of my favorite panels in the entire manga. After some supernatural hijinks cause Ichigo to inherit the powers of Rukia, a Soul Reaper, basically Samurai Grim Reaper, he's tasked with hunting and killing hollows, monstrous undead beings who feed on the souls of the living and dead. And this leads him to a battle with his first big enemy, Grand Fisher, as it's revealed that Grand Fisher is far more dangerous than the other hollows, but is also responsible for the death of Ichigo's mother, who died trying to protect him, a trauma that Ichigo has never recovered from, giving this fight a real emotional weight, as he's not just fighting a scary monster, but his own inability to overcome his own grief. Grand Fisher mocking Ichigo with the image of his deceased mother. And the really sad part is Ichigo doesn't even win. Grand Fisher escapes, and this is the moment I started to really love Bleach. Because grief isn't just something you can overcome in a single instant, and Ichigo's failure to defeat Grand Fisher is a fantastic expression of that. This is the core of Ichigo's character, his inability to escape his own grief, and how that fuels his desire to protect the people he loves. And it's that motivation that drives Ichigo through the first major story arc of Bleach, the Soul Society. After spending 2 months in the world of the living, Rukia is captured by 2 extremely powerful Soul Reapers and charged with the crime of transferring her powers to a human, sentenced to death in just 1 month, with Ichigo and his band of supernaturally powered teenagers attempting to save Rukia by launching an invasion on Soul Society, entering a dangerous new world defined by a rigid hierarchy with rules that feel cold and unfair. And if that isn't a damn near perfect analogy for being a teenager entering adult society for the first time, I don't know what is. The real beauty of this arc, however, comes from the Soul Reapers themselves, and that's because of how well developed they are, both as an organization and as a community of people. The Soul Reapers are made up of 13 different squads, each led by a vice captain and captain. Vice captains being powerful warriors, each possessing their own sword with its own special ability known as Shikai, and captains being dramatically more powerful, having access to Bankai, spectacular, ultra ultra powerful techniques unique to each sword. And it's just a lot of fun discovering what each captain and lieutenant can do, and creates a tremendous sense of escalation as Ichigo goes from fighting regular foot troops to vice captains all the way to captains, which are depicted as these terrifying behemoths, massively powerful and nearly impossible for Ichigo and his friends to overcome, creating an incredible amount of tension and drama whenever one steps onto the battlefield. But even more than that, the reason 13 Court Guard works so well as villains is because they kind of don't feel like villains at all. There are monsters among them, but most just feel like people. The series taking the time to develop their history, motives, drives, and most importantly, relationships. Pick any two members of Soul Society.
Y que en realidad no son los malos, porque en realidad ellos están cumpliendo la orden de que Rukia violó una ley. En realidad los que son malos son Ichigo y sus amigos. Ellos simplemente están cumpliendo la ley de su sociedad de almas. El problema viene de Rukia, que violó la ley, y de Ichigo y los demás, que están interfiriendo en un juicio del que no les importa nada.
And chances are you'll be able to draw a kind of social spiderweb of interlinking relationships connecting the two, and it's these relationships that are at the heart of the Soul Reapers. Take the captain of Squad 7, Komamura, and the captain of Squad 9, Tosin. Komamura, being deeply ashamed of his bestial appearance, hides his face from the world, but he's found comfort in his bond with Tosin, a blind swordsman who doesn't care what anyone looks like. And it's really sweet, but there are so many little relationships like this. Childhood friends, rivals, drinking buddies, unrequited lovers. There's a tremendous amount of time spent developing these characters and their relationships. And it's from this that the battles of the Soul Society draw their emotion. And you can see this especially halfway through the arc when Ichigo faces Renji Aburai, one of the Soul Reapers responsible for capturing Rukia. But the beautiful thing about this fight is it's not just a good guy versus a bad guy, as it's revealed that Renji and Rukia actually grew up together in one of Soul Society's most violent criminal districts, and learned to survive by forming a band of thieves with other children and eking out a life of impoverished happiness amidst the chaos. But as the two grew older and closer, they lose each one of their friends to the violence around them, and so desperate to build a better life for each other, join Soul Society as student Soul Reapers, but become separated when Rukia is adopted into a prestigious noble family headed by Byakuya, and so Renji and Rukia's life together comes to an end. Because of this, when Renji finds out that Rukia is going to be put to death, it kills him. He wants to be the kind of person who can save her, but he also can't let himself believe that someone of his lowly status could ever stand against something as impossible and monolithic as the Soul Society, and especially against his captain and Rukia's own brother, the massively powerful Byakuya. And that's why Ichigo's presence in Soul Society torments Renji, because it forces him to confront that belief. And that is the emotional core of this battle. And so when Ichigo defeats Renji, it's Renji's eyes being open to the idea that he can make a difference, and even if there's only a tiny chance, it's worth taking that chance for someone you love. And it's that realization that allows him to switch sides and finally face off against Byakuya. This is what I love about the battles of Soul Society. Each fight has meaning, every fight has some emotional weight or reveals some new piece of information. Even minor encounters like Chad versus Kyoraku demonstrate the ocean of power separating regular people and captains, and as a result, Ichigo's showdown with Kenpachi that immediately follows feels all the more desperate and terrifying, because we have the context to understand how frightening the prospect of facing a captain is. The battle forcing Ichigo to overcome his own fear of death in order to move forward and save.
Para mí, cuando comenzó la decadencia de Bleach, para mí cuando Ichigo recupera sus poderes, me parecía un lindo cierre el que dé sus poderes y sus habilidades sobrenaturales muy al estilo Full Metal Alchemist para salvar a la gente que quería. Me daba un buen un buen cierre. Personaje favorito de Bleach, siempre lo dije, Byakuya. Me encanta el diseño de Byakuya. ¡Qué locura, vos! ¡Qué personaje hermoso! Urahara, también. El Bankai de Urahara. ¡Ah! Ichimaru Gin, no, no me lo recuerdes. No.
Rukia in one of the most violent showdowns of the series. Each fight serves a purpose, each fight tells a story, and serves as a link in the chain that moves the larger narrative forward. But it's in that larger narrative that begins to form around these fights, Soul Society becomes one of my favorite pieces of shonen storytelling ever. As we come to know the 13 Court Guard, we start to notice that not all captains seem to trust each other. Some, like the softly spoken Aizen, suspect that something insidious is growing within the organization. Certain orders from the Central 46, basically the shadow government of Soul Society.
Esto me parece un plot twist tremendo, porque todos pensábamos que Aizen era re buenito, ¿viste? Ay, pobre Aizen, no sé qué, y que lo matan y no sé qué. Y después vuelve como el malo. Ese es un plot twist tremendo.
Don't seem to make sense, like Rukia's execution being repeatedly pushed forward. And it seems to have something to do with the unsettling, snake-like Captain Ichimaru Gin, who seems to be taking a disturbing glee in Rukia's execution. But as Aizen grows closer to the truth, he warns his assistant Captain Momo, who may or may not be in love with him, that there is some danger within Soul Society, and that's when, boom, holy shit, Aizen ends up murdered the next morning, and you realize this is not just a simple rescue mission. Someone with the power to kill captains is behind a deeply fucked conspiracy taking over Soul Society, and it's so exciting. But that's when we discover, hey guys, I'm just gonna let you know that I'm about to spoil Soul Society, and it's 2 decades old and most of you have already watched it, but if...
Sí, bueno, ¿cómo te van a spoiler la Sociedad de Almas? No, tiene como 80 años ese arco. Es como decir, Naruto le gana a Neji en los exámenes Chunin. Me spoileaste. Me spoileaste. Me spoileaste.
If you haven't and you like shonen, you should. It's fantastic and it holds up beautifully, so you can skip here if you want to avoid spoilers.
No.
When Momo's friends enter the forbidden chamber of the Central 46, holy shit, they're all fucking dead. But then who's been given the orders? And oh my god, Aizen's still alive! What is happening? And then he stabs Momo, and she loved you, Aizen, she loved you! And it's revealed that the true villain of this entire fucking arc wasn't the evil snake man, it was the soft glasses boy! And so even when Ichigo fights all the way to the peak of Soul Society and defeats Byakuya, Rukia's brother and the personification of putting what society says is right over protecting the ones you love, it feels monumentous. Ichigo has
puede ser, Willy, que te... Después te saco el ban, pero no me gustó el comentario, para nada.
possible system. He's won until Aizen appears and everything Ichigo's learned, all the power he's gained, it is nothing in the face of this new enemy. And Aizen removes an ancient artifact in Rukia's body that this whole execution was just deployed to get, and who alongside Gin and Tosen disappears into the world of hollows as he attempts to ascend to the power of godhood. And man, it's fucking fantastic. The entire arc beautifully building to a shocking, satisfying climax, letting Ichigo overcome his own trauma by literally facing the gods of death themselves and saving someone he loves while overturning a corrupt system, while seamlessly revealing the true villain of Bleach, leading beautifully into the next major story arc and its pure shonen storytelling brilliance. And I only have 3 tiny issues with it. 1. Ichigo is kind of a reactionary character. 2. The world building of the Soul Society is a little weak. This is a place where all people of every culture, of every era, are all crammed together in one gigantic afterlife. But instead of expressing that through the world building, it feels like Kubo kind of just looked at feudal Japan and went, that. And 3, I'm gonna frame this in the form of a question that we'll come back to later, and that is, how does Ichigo win fights? These are all such minor issues that if we were talking about Soul Society by itself, I wouldn't even bring them up. But I do because they are the seeds to problems that will eventually grow throughout the series.
Sí, chico, sí, chico. Ichigo está medio rotito, sí. Muchachos, 1100 subs. No lo puedo creer, amigo.